Okay, so this is something that's not going to be super extensive, but I want to go through it, especially when we talk about Mashiach and we talk about messianic prophecies and we talk about Isaiah. This Haftarah portion is Isaiah 54, and actually it talks about the flood waters of Noach and all that. And this is actually the second time this Haftarah comes up during the Parsha Noach. Okay, and it kind of bookends um, the seasons, right? So because we're going to go through Rosh Hashanah and then we're going to go through Yom Kippur and then we're going to go through Sukkot, and at the end of Sukkot we're going to have the last reading of Deuteronomy, and then the following Shabbat we're going to be in Genesis. We're going to start over and very quickly being at Noach, and then this Haftarah is going to come up again. So it comes up really close together, but when we look at it from a cyclic standpoint, it's actually not really close together. They're on opposing ends. It's just because the ends meet, they're together, okay? And so when we hit it next week, we won't hit it again all the way till the end of the year, and you'll say, "Oh, that was a long time." It only seems like very short because we're at the end of the beginning where they meet, the continuing of the cycle. Now again, what is all that? Well, it's the Mashiach, right? This here in Isaiah 54 is talking about the messianic hope, the messianic redemption, right? I mean, if we need to question this, for thy maker is thy husband, Yahweh of hosts is his name, and thy redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, the God of the whole earth shall he be called. When shall he be called the God of the whole earth? I mean, he already is, but when shall he be called the God of the whole earth? In the days of the Mashiach, when Mashiach is here reigning as king. When he is physically here on the earth, the whole earth will be full of the knowledge of God. Why? Because it's one of the key things that we look towards to recognize the Mashiach is, does he elevate the world to godliness? Does he raise people up to a godly perspective, to godliness? It's what we look for. Why? Because we know that there's a point where the whole earth is supposed to be filled with the knowledge of God, like the seas, right? And so when it says here, the God of the whole earth shall he be called, when? In the days of Mashiach. This Isaiah 54 is related to Mashiach. And so, yes, it is a function of Israel. Yes, it is a function of Israel. Israel is God's servant. Israel is a nation, not just Israel, the Jews. Israel as a whole, Israel is God's nation. It is a function of that nation to be a light to the nations, light to the world, and to elevate the people. But it's also true that the king is the people and the people is the king. Okay? In Eastern thought and ancient thought and biblical thought, the people is the king and the king is the people. The king represented and was the spokesman for the people, and the people followed the will of the king, and in doing so there was a synergy. They are you see that through David. David, the people loved David. David loved the people. The people looked to do the will of David. David looked out for the good of the people. He had a heart for God. Why? Because that's how it's God, right? It's God's perspective. So it's what we look for as that. And so things that are true for Israel should also be true for the king of Israel. And things that are true for the king should also be true for the people of Israel. They should just be that way. And in ancient times, Judaism certainly looked at it that way. So if the nation of Israel should suffer, should the king be exempt? In our modern world, we may think so. We may think that, a king is above the law. From a Jewish perspective, the king is the law. From an Eastern perspective, the king is the law. If that were not so, even ancient Babylonians, okay, you have the story of Esther. And in Esther, there's a decree that goes out, and the decree is to kill the Jews. Well, I mean, if the king is above the law, he could have just said, let's kill that law. Let's just repeal it. Done. Jews, don't worry. No, this is a law. It's in effect. I can't change it. Aren't you the king? Yeah, I can't change it. What am I going to do? They say, well, we'll make a new law that creates we'll find a loophole and we'll make a new law to go around that. Why? Because the king is the law. If a king's law changed here and there willy-nilly, that's no king. How do you trust? What do you know what to do? Okay, these are alien thoughts. The king is the law is the king, right? So the king is bound by the law. Why? Because he represents the law. He represents justice. If you have a representative of justice that's unjust, you don't have justice, right? So in Judaism in particular, through the Torah, you find when it talks about the king is held to a really high standard. And the king isn't exempt. Okay, the king is not exempt. And so what we look for the people, we also look for the king. So when we deal with Isaiah 53, when we deal with that, there's the rationalists, as I talk about in Judaism, there's these rationalists that say, this is not talking about Mashiach, this is talking about Israel. Well, it's talking about both. Okay? As the king suffers, and Yeshua even says it, right? Yeshua says, if I suffer, you're going to suffer too, right? If they persecute me, they're going to persecute you. Why? Just simply because, because you're believers of him. Yes, absolutely. But also because if the king is persecuted, so are the people. Okay? If the king is the head, the king is the brain, the embodiment, the people are the body. If a head suffers, does not the body suffer with it? If your head is afflicted, does not your body suffer with it? Yes. These are absurd when we try and peel these things apart and say, no, this is Israel, this is suffering. It has nothing to do with Mashiach. Well, if it has to do with Israel, then it has to do with Mashiach. Why? Because Mashiach is the king of Israel. He's of the line of David. Okay? Should the nation suffer and the king not be afflicted? Preposterous. What kind of king would go about night and day and being in joy while his people suffered? Oh, they're in hunger. They have no food. There's famine in the land. Let me eat a feast. What kind of king is that? That's not a good king, right? So, when you have people like anti-missionaries, you have people like Tovia Singer who comes along and he says, look at this. Christians are so stupid. Oh, look how stupid they are with this. This isn't a messianic prophecy. This is about the nation of Israel. And they say things like, look here, Isaiah 53. This isn't about Mashiach. Well, if 54 is about the messianic redemption, why wouldn't 53 be about it as well? Now, it could change. It might be separate topics, might shift gears, but I think it's fair to say if 54 is 53 could be, okay? And certainly if it's talking about Israel as a suffering servant, certainly it's talking about its king. And so here, one of the things that is said is this. It says here in 53, who has believed our report, to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed, to whom is the arm of Yahweh revealed. Now there's other places too where this very interesting notion of the idea of this arm of Yahweh being revealed or bared. And it's kind of interesting because from my perspective, I submit that the revealing of the arm is kind of a concealing of the arm in a sense. And what I mean by that is the revealing of the arm is the arm coming in as it says in John, and he took on flesh and dwelled among us, right? Inside that flesh was concealed the Word of God, but in that concealment it was being revealed that this was the Word of God. Okay, he was being bared. This is the Word of God. Okay. But it says, to who has believed our report, to whom his arm has been revealed. And anti-missionaries say, wait, you can't start here at Isaiah 53. You have to go back to Isaiah 52 that precedes 53. Okay? So in this argument, 52 is important, and 53 isn't. Well, in my argument, 54 is important as well as 53 and 52. If you're going to say 52 is important to understanding this, then I say 54 is important to understanding 53. Okay? So at the end of 52, we have this talk about, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that brings good news, right? We had that, saying our God reigneth, which seems to be talking about the Mashiach, Messianic time, our God reigneth, right? And being exalted. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. This is said to be related to the Mashiach. Now others now say this servant is Israel. This is saying that in the days of the Mashiach, or there will be a day, Mashiach or no, where the world looks at Israel and they say they'll be ashamed. Or we persecuted them. God is true. God is right. God is real. He's really God's servant, and we're going to be ashamed because of the way we treated him. That's fair, and that's true. But that doesn't mean that this isn't specifically talking about the king, because this idea, this notion is this person's going to be exalted, extolled very high. So if the king is, if we say this is about Mashiach, if we say this is about the king, and he's extolled and exalted and made very high, then so should the people. The issue is people want to divorce the two. Say this can't be talking about the Mashiach because it's talking about the people. If it's true for the people, it's true for the king. If it's true for the king, it's true for the people. So if you're saying there's a time where Israel will be exalted and high and very extolled, then by definition the king of that people will also be extolled and very high. Or if you were to say the king is extolled and made very high, then by definition he's going to be lifting the people up with him. Okay? This is how, if we are to stand against these claims, if we are to argue against those, this is what we need to do. If we try and fight this battleground and we try to say, no, this is specifically about Yeshua, it has nothing to do with Israel, you're going to lose. If you say, no, you're 100% right, this is about the people, but if it's true for the people, it's true for the king, how do you argue? They're going to say, no, this is only about, that can't be about the king. You say, oh, what are you saying? The king's going to be a bum? The people are going to be living high and the king's going to be a bum? The people won't even have a king? They won't even know where he is? They'll go down to the ghetto and find the king? No. If the people are extolled and exalted, so is the king. He's the head of the body. So yeah, sure. This is about Israel and their sufferings. And why does Israel suffer? Because of the word of God. And who is your king? The word of God. Why? How can I say the word of God is your king? Because if you live yourself to be a servant of the word of God, then it rules over you, and what rules over you is Lord over you, and what is Lord over you is your king. This isn't playing with words. This is just truth. So it says, behold, thy servant shall be exalted, right? And they're saying, well, Israel as made low will be extolled. And look what it says. As many were astonished as thee. His visage was so marred, more than any man, his form more than the sons of man. This does seem like it's speaking about an individual. Now, if you want to say this is only allegorical, that it's about the people, I submit to you that it's both allegorical and literal. Okay? And so shall he sprinkle many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him. For that which had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they consider. And so the rationalist, the anti-missionary argument is saying this. It's saying, look, because Israel is now being extolled, and it's about Israel, it's not about the king, because Israel is being extolled and exalted and being brought to a high position, that these nations are so astonished at this. They thought Israel was bad. They thought that it was wicked. They thought that, that they were smitten by God and rejected, right? And you have that replacement theology. You have that within Christianity, bad Israel, and now all of a sudden it's coming up, this notion that Israel is rising up. Well, it's kind of happening in our days, right? And it's saying that who hath believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed, or the arm of Yahweh been revealed? And the anti-missionary argument is this. It's saying that this is what the kings are saying. It's saying that this isn't what Israel is saying. It's saying this is what the kings are saying. The kings are saying, who would have believed this, that this nation that's despised and rejected is now being exalted? Who would have known that? We're being ashamed. We're being astonished. The people that we despise, we're finding that God is real. This is his nation. This is coming to pass. How wicked were we? How awful were we? Here's the problem. Here's the problem with that interpretation and why I push back on it. It says this. The kings shut their mouths at him. If their mouths are shut by what's happening, how are they speaking? If the king's mouth are shut because they're astonished at what's happening, how are they saying, who believed our report? How can this be their testimony, their report? Actually, how does that make sense anyway, that they would say, if they are the nations and Israel is the one being subject to it, who else is there? You have the nations and you have Israel. So if the nations are the ones that are astonished, who would they report to? Who would they tell about this? Israel? Israel's the only other person in the room. So why would they say, who would believe a report? You're all witnessing it. You are collectively a he. You are collectively a he, the nations. You'd be reporting to yourself. You're all witnessing it. This is stupid. This is bad logic. This is arguing. This is sleight of hand tricks. Oh, see, the nations here. They're the ones that are astonished. No. This is about the suffering of the Mashiach and the suffering of the nations and the exaltation of the Mashiach and the exaltation of the nation of Israel that will happen on account of Mashiach. And it's the issue is, who would believe this? Who would believe this story about? Not the nations, because they reject Israel. They think Israel's bad. They think, who would believe Israel's report that God would do this? Who would believe the prophet's report? And that's really who had believed our reports? The prophet. This is Isaiah speaking. Who has believed our report? The report of the prophets to the people that this would happen. The nations don't believe it. Israel doesn't believe it. But the prophets are true. And this is, who will believe this testimony, right? Who will believe the words of the prophet? Look, the arm of the Lord was revealed to the prophet. The prophet speaks. From the arm of the Lord is what the very words that come out of the prophet's mouth. They're the ones that report upon this, and neither many of Israel believed it, and neither the nations. And so to say that this isn't about the Mashiach, it's a lie. But to say that this has nothing to do with Israel, you can't say that either. They're intertwined. They're intrinsically connected. If he was just a king, okay, he's just a king. If he's the king of Israel, I mean, I don't know how to make it any clearer. And so when we deal with this issue, if it comes up, and sometimes this stuff doesn't just come through anti-missionaries. You're going to find it even amongst atheists. You're going to find it amongst maybe former believers. You're going to find it against other Christians. There are those in Christianity today that still believe in Yeshua, but they don't believe that Isaiah 53 is a messianic prophecy. You say, how can you do that? They do. There's lots of things Christians do. There's lots of things Christians there's lots of Christians that don't believe the Bible. That I'm a Christian, but I don't really believe or trust the Bible. Yeah, the anti-Semitic, whatever. You don't have to be non-anti-Semitic to say this is a messianic prophecy. You could completely tie this in your replacement theology and blah, blah, blah. But the issue is this is a prophecy about the Mashiach. And so it's tied to the nation. And we don't need to wrangle over exactly, is the servant Israel or is the servant the Mashiach? They're both. It's both. Okay? And I could pull it up. I don't really have time. If I had been a little bit more prepared, I could show that in the Targum, Jonathan on Isaiah, he actually is interchangeable in it between Israel as the nation and Mashiach specifically in his paraphrase of Isaiah 53. And I think because he carried that notion that they're interconnected. So when we look at Israel as a suffering servant, when we look at ourselves as being a part of Israel, suffering is a part of that. It's just a part of that identity. If you're going to come in and you're going to take on that identity, you're going to have to take on some level of suffering, some level of ridicule, some level of disregard and disrespect and, possibly brutality. I mean, you take on this identity, you could die. It is part of it. I mean, if you come into a faith and you think that, everything's happy-go-lucky and everything's great and gravy and that you don't have any expectation, there are parts of if you travel abroad, there are parts of the world, I mean, even in this country, but there's parts of the world that you have ZCs just alone, let alone something like ZCs in a kippah or something like that, you could get beaten in the streets. Okay? Or if you come out, maybe you don't wear those things, maybe you come out but people know, that you stand with Israel. You wear a Star of David, something like that. I mean, it becomes known that you're a believer in Yeshua, and on account of that, you're a promoter of Israel, and you stand with Israel as the nation, that you could die. It's just a fact. And so it's just part of that. It's part of that heritage, part of that process. And so let's not wrangle about it. So you're, a little fiddler on the roof. You're right. And you're also right. Bring it together and say, let's kill the argument, right? Yeah, sure. It is about Mashiach. You're right. It's about Israel. Oh, you're also right. And they're not mutually exclusive. Okay? Does that make sense? So let me go ahead and close that.